forma bastante breve, podemos apontar a necessidade de regulações obrigatórias, medidas regulatórias mandatórias, obrigatórias, e não um processo de autorregulação, que tem se mostrado muito pouco eficiente na transformação de perfil de nutrientes e do ambiente alimentar. Né? Ter uma regulação direta do poder de mercado dessas
Of the
corporações.
market power of these corporations of ultra-processed foods, monitoring the quality of portfolio of products, restricting the budget of the marketing of these products, and to limit the sales of ultra-processed products in retail. And it's also important to prevent corporate concentration both in the food market and thinking about antitrust regulation, and also political intervention to prevent their corporate monopolization and the decision-making process of public policies, trying to reduce, modify, or prevent public policies that are connected to the reduction of the production and marketing of ultra-processed foods. Considering the supply chain of food, the food supply chain, there are three main blocks. The first one is the agricultural area that is redirecting the subsidies for agricultural products that is concentrated in the production of food, that offers cheap food for the processing of food production, and trying to have a food system that is not monotonous, and also that will enable the production of more diverse and local production with agroecological and sustainable production. We also need commercial policies that are going to incorporate health restrictions, such as the ones considering taxation of food and mechanisms in between law or legal dispute between the investor and the states, and to protect our agriculture and domestic markets. And lastly, connect the food topic to the environmental agenda. COP30 just finished, and it's more and more necessary for environmental policies to consider the production of the ultra-processed foods, and for us to redirect the environmental policies, considering the sustainable use of resources and the pollution that is caused by this type of industry. We have a clear perception that these policies that restrict production, publicity, and the consumption of ultra-processed foods, they have to be followed by other policies that increase the availability, physical accessibility, and financial accessibility, and also a small amount of the ultra-processed within the meals that are prepared. Our experience with the PNI, which is the National Program of Food, has some experience in income transfer and also some specific subsidies for specific groups of foods, considering especially some groups in the population that are most vulnerable, and to think about models of trading foods or food trading that favor commercial alternatives that will sell true food and traditional dishes. And this is the example of our prato feito, which is the dish that is ready for, such as the case of small restaurants.
Of course, the implementation of these policies have to take into consideration the differences in the food transition standards throughout the globe. We have differences in the participation of ultra-processed in diet, considering the highly developed countries, the countries in development, and the poorer countries. So for that, there are not only differences related to the participation of ultra-processed food, but the conformation of the food system itself and of the food culture in those countries. Policies will vary, but the main message is that regardless of the level of consumption, it's urgent that we adopt a set of public policies that take into consideration the positioning of the country in the process of the transition to ultra-processed food, and the diets and the economic, social characteristics in the contexts of each country. To finalize, we draw the attention to the need of policies coordinated in food systems that reinforce themselves mutually. And so we have effects that should be more robust, long-lasting, and synergic. And here we highlight the important role of what Brazilian food system is, with a more recent experience of the Brazilian public policy of coordinating a set of other policies from other sectors to beyond the health sector, turning towards the production of a food system that should be more able of tackling the sanitary challenge. And then I couldn't avoid mentioning that food guides are important instruments that provide guidance of this coherence between public policies, and that's what's been happening in Brazil. And also that in our region, in the Americas, we are 7 countries that incorporated the new classification in their food guidelines with explicit recommendations for reduction of ultra-processed food. Greeting Colombia, that was our last country that recently published its food guide. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Patricia. Right next, we'll have the presentation from Dr. Philip Baker from the University of Sydney, Australia. Philip Baker is a researcher from the University of Sydney and main co-author of the series. He is a specialist in global food systems and researches the advancement of ultra-processed food in the world, corporate power, international regulation in food. Philip, you have the floor.
Bom dia, obrigado. It is my pleasure to be here in Brazil. I want to start by thanking my friend Carlos Monteiro, Patricia, and Paula, the team from New Pens, for inviting me to Brazil. Honorable guests, the Minister, Denise Fiocruz Brasília, and to all of you here today for making it to this event. I also want to say that it is an honor to be here in Brazil, which is a country that is leading the world in the fight against food insecurity, in the fight against nutrition, and in the fight against ultra-processed foods. In my university, when I teach my students, I often refer to Brazil for its leadership, Concia, a remarkable success, Bolsa Familia, the Brazilian dietary guidelines, the National School Feeding Program, and importantly, the enshrinement of the right to food and the right to health in the Constitution of Brazil. This is a shining light in the world that I hope many other countries will follow, and I want to thank you for your leadership. Okay, now to the Lancet Series on ultra-processed foods, and in particular, paper 3. Thank you. Okay, this paper, our starting proposition in this paper is that the ultra-processed food problem is a commercially generated one. It results from the growing economic and political power of the industry and its restructuring of food systems nearly everywhere for corporate profitability above all other goals. Our second proposition is that the global public health response to this problem is still evolving. It's similar to where the tobacco control movement was decades ago. Government policy responses in many countries around the world have done very little to tackle the commercial and the structural determinants of this problem, having focused largely on consumer responsibility, reformulation, and voluntary self-regulation. And this lack of policy momentum reflects the relentless efforts of the industry to counter opposition, to block effective public policy responses. Understanding these strategies used by this industry is essential to understand and for policy to respond to. Our final proposition in this paper is that the continuing rise of ultra-processed foods in human diets and the harm that this generates is by no means inevitable. Rather, this rise can be disrupted, and we can reverse this trend through collective action, through structural intervention in our food system. And we see already these powerful public health responses that are building momentum, especially in Latin America, including here in Brazil, and in sub-Saharan Africa. And these countries, these success stories provide key lessons for other countries to take action. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we had two objectives. The first objective is to understand the root causes of the ultra-processed food problem, focusing on the structural and commercial determinants of the problem. The second objective is to present strategies for countering corporate power in food systems and for mobilizing a global public health response. Now, this research was very much informed by the voices of people already taking action on ultra-processed foods on the ground within countries. And we spoke to these people all around the world through workshops here in Latin America, in the Caribbean, in sub-Saharan Africa, and the Asia Pacific. And you can find these voices. You can read the opinions of these advocates in the supplemental appendix that comes with this paper. And this adds a lot of richness to the results and the recommendations of this paper. So I encourage you to please read the supplement if you have time. Okay, next slide, please. Let's begin with this first objective. What are the root causes of the global UPF problem? Next slide, please. So to understand the root causes, we started with the NOVA food classification itself. Now, most of the debates and the criticisms about ultra-processed foods are highly technical in nature. These usually come from epidemiology or food technologists. What these debates often ignore is that NOVA differentiates foods not just by the extent of processing, but also by the purpose of processing. And by focusing on purpose, this forces us to ask not only what is in the food, but also who produces the food and why, for what purpose. Now, humans have been processing food for thousands of years. Techniques like grinding, drying, salting, smoking, fermenting have transformed foods into safer, tastier, more nutritious and durable forms. And this has contributed to food security, to employment, to convenience, and to food culture. NOVA groups 1 to 3 form the basis of traditional dietary patterns. And this is the purpose of processing for these first 3 groups of foods. Now, in contrast, the purpose of NOVA 4, ultra processing, is profit maximization. They are a result of a corporate business model, of a corporate logic that relies upon using cheap commodity ingredients and ultra-processing technologies to minimize the cost of production and designing products for maximum sensory appeal by optimizing the taste, the smell, the color, and even the sound that the product makes when you bite into it. It relies upon emphatic branding and intensive marketing to generate demand and drive consumption, and especially by powerful new forms of digital marketing, much of which is targeting our children. And as NOVA says, it is these features of ultra-processed foods that make ultra-processed foods liable to displace NOVA groups 1 to 3 in human diets. Now, we took this idea of profitability as closer. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. Now, we took this as a very interesting idea, because if ultra-processed foods are the most profitable way of producing food, then we would expect to find evidence that the ultra-processed food manufacturers are the most profitable type of corporations or businesses in the food system. So we analyzed the profitability of food corporations listed on the US stock exchanges, and that is exactly what we found. Between 1962 and 2021, of the almost $3 trillion in payouts by food corporations to shareholders, over half of those was distributed by UPF manufacturers alone. Next slide, please. In other words, ultra processing is the most profitable way of producing food. Now, this is crucial to understand and for policy to respond to, because these corporations can use their high profitability to resource and ultimately drive continued growth and expansion. Higher profitability means these corporations have more resources to spend on building more factories, for mergers and acquisitions, for expanding the production and the distribution of these foods, and importantly, for spending very large sums on the marketing of ultra-processed foods. So these corporations can spend much more on marketing than other types of food producers. Much, much more. This is really crucial to understand. Now, higher profitability also means more resources to pay for lobbyists, to pay for lawyers, to pay for forms of political influence that these corporations, this industry can use to block government regulation. And this ensures that the industry can continue to grow and continue to displace other types of food producers, other types of foods in human diets. Next slide, please. Now, in this work, we conceptualize the UPF industry as comprising the manufacturers, these manufacturers at its core. And it has often been said that small and medium-sized businesses also produce ultra-processed foods. But this misses the crucial point that it is these transnational corporations who spread UPFs globally, who spread them within countries. It is these corporations that invest the huge sums of money in marketing, and it is these corporations who coordinate the industry's political activities. Next slide, please. Now, it is important to also understand that these corporations do not just compete with one another for UPF market share. They also compete with other types of foods, and hence with other types of food producers in our food system. And I think this is captured by this quote from a former Coca-Cola executive. The ambition is not just to capture soft drink market share, but also to displace ordinary tap water to become the most consumed beverage on earth. This is the logic of the corporation. Next slide, please. And in addition to these core manufacturers, there is a broader system of codependent actors who collectively drive the production, marketing, and distribution of ultra-processed foods. These include ingredients and plastics producers, grocery retailers, fast food chains, advertising firms, lobbyists and front groups, and their research partners. And we label these actors together as the UPF industry and the food systems they generate and control as UPF systems. Next slide, please. Now, this wider conceptualization or understanding of the industry is captured perfectly by this quote from a Cargill brochure. We are the flour in your bread. We are the wheat in your noodles, the salt on your fries. We are the corn in your tortillas, the chocolate in your dessert, and the sweetener in your soft drink. These are the agri-commodities and the corporations that sit behind the manufacturers. Next slide, please. Now, we also describe the history of this industry. The leading UPF manufacturers were established in the United States and in Western Europe. And then as ultra-processed food sales in those markets began to slow down and stagnate, the industry aggressively expanded and continues to expand in low and middle income countries to ensure that growth and profitability continues. And it was from the 1980s onwards that this industry really started to accelerate its globalization alongside deregulation of the financial sector. And I'm not going to say more on this because I offer you an encouragement to read the papers to find out more. Next slide, please. Now, as the UPF industry has globalized its production networks and its marketing, it has also globalized its political influence. As the industry's supply chains and production networks spread around the world, so do the networks of the industry's power. So do the networks of corporate influence through these its lobby groups. Now, this figure represents the results of an analysis that we did for the series, demonstrating the global network of interest groups the corporations use to implement their political influence strategies. And that includes organizations from here in Brazil, ABIA, for example. The size of the circles indicates the number of connections to these front groups, and you can clearly see the central coordinating role of the leading UPF manufacturers like Nestle, Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, and Unilever. Now, we also describe the industry's corporate political activity, which includes lobbying and making political donations, litigation against government. Litigation is a major, major problem that we have to overcome. And we know from here in Brazil that your regulatory agency, Anvisa, has been under attack from corporate litigation for many years. And the strategy is not just to weaken the regulation, it is also to weaken the institution, to degrade its effectiveness. And this is how corporate power works, through litigation. And this is something we need to understand. This is something we need to address very importantly. The other are partnerships. Partner with us. We can govern with you. Public-private partnerships. We are part of the solution to the problems that we generate. You can trust us to self-regulate our activities. You don't need to adopt regulation. We have it handled. We are regulating ourselves. We will somehow slow down the growth, the expansion, the profitability of the industry by regulating our own activities. This is like inviting the criminals to install the security system in your home. It's a bad idea. It includes health and greenwashing, working with our products are healthier and greener. It involves framing and co-opting debates and manufacturing scientific debate, manufacturing scientific doubt by funding researchers and academics to generate evidence that is favorable to industry. Next slide, please. Now, we critically evaluate the claims made by the corporations and their front groups, that they provide jobs and investment to help grow economies, that they provide solutions to malnutrition through micronutrient fortification, that they are self-regulating their marketing, that they're using sustainably sourced palm oil or reduced plastics packaging and so on. Yet these claims ignore the fact that these products are harmful and socially unnecessary in the first place. Money spent on ultra-processed foods is money that is extracted out of low and middle income countries to shareholders in North America and Western Europe. It is money that is diverted away from local food producers, and this undermines the economic viability of local food systems and traditional food producers. The claims made by the industry ignore the facts that huge areas of agricultural land are diverted away from nature or diverted away from core food production to produce these commodity ingredients like soy, like palm oil, for example. And the contributions of this industry to biodiversity loss, climate change, and to the unfolding global plastics crisis. Now, these impacts are likely very extensive, given PepsiCo claims a 7 million acre agricultural footprint. Nestle's greenhouse gas emissions exceed those of Switzerland, its home country, and that Nestle, Coca-Cola, and PepsiCo are the world's leading plastics polluters. Now to the second objective, and the next slide, please. So how might we, based on this understanding of the problem as one that is commercially generated, mobilize a global public health response? Next slide, please. Now, first of all, why now? In an analysis we did for the series, we show there has been remarkable and sustained growth in public attention to ultra-processed foods. The number of media articles using the term ultra-processed food grew from just a few in 2010 to almost 7,000 in 2024. And this is more than 3 times the number of articles using all other unhealthy food descriptors combined. I think this is a remarkable success of the Nova Food classification of the UPF concept. that it has managed to capture the public attention and imagination all around the world. This is important because a growth in attention like this often coincides with social mobilization and demands for policy change. And this indicates that a window of opportunity has opened for mobilizing a public health response. Next slide, please. Now, we outlined the global response should begin by reducing the industry's power in food systems and everything that Patricia said in paper 2, removing agricultural subsidies, taxation, regulations that greatly reduce the power of corporate marketing. And ultimately, we need to disrupt the ultra-processed food business model, make it less profitable. At the same time, we need to ensure that that resources in our food system are being redistributed to those producing healthy and sustainable foods so that the profits flow to those producers and to communities rather than going to corporate shareholders. It means governance reform, and we call for an end for any reliance on industry self-regulation and partnerships, and governments to instead anchor their responses in public policy, law, and human rights. It involves conflicts of interest safeguards, getting this industry and its lobbyists out of the policy-making room, just like many countries have done with tobacco control. Next slide, please. Any transition to low UPF diets must be just. We call for great care to ensure policy responses do not exacerbate food insecurity, that they are gender just, and to avoid stigmatizing certain UPFs, like infant formula, for example. Next slide, please. Now, we also say that, we also talk about how we can define the global public health problem. And today, up until now, the global challenge of unhealthy diets has largely been framed in terms of obesity prevention, non-communicable diseases. And this focus on obesity has been a challenge or problematic because it has allowed the industry to shift blame away from its products towards arguing that obesity is complex. Obesity is caused by physical inactivity. So we call for a shift in the global focus to prioritize ultra-processed foods as a global public health problem in its own right. And we define this global public health problem, we outline the global public health objectives, and we suggest what the UN agencies, what the international community, what governments might do together to mobilize a global public health response. This includes empowering the World Health Organization, the other UN agencies to develop technical guidance, perhaps an international policy framework in the form of a World Health Assembly resolution, or a WHO policy or guideline, using human rights law, and finally prioritizing this UPF issue in the sustainable food systems agenda. Next slide, please. Finally, to focus on what does it mean to mobilize collective action. And here I would ask you to read the paper and learn from the success stories from Latin America, from Sub-Saharan Africa, where we present these case studies from countries like Mexico, Ghana, Chile, who have mobilized these very powerful coalitions involving parliamentarians, health, environmental advocates, consumer protection advocates, First Nations groups, and especially young people and youth who bring moral authority and leadership to these coalitions. And these coalitions have used political advocacy, communications, research, and legal research and litigation very powerfully to drive policy change. And my last slide, I will just say, next slide, please, that this is what it looks like. These are images from Mexico where this very powerful coalition has formed and driven these really remarkable policy successes. This is what we need. This is what it takes to stand up to corporate power, reclaim our public institutions and food systems for health, for justice, for culture, for sustainability. Obrigado.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Okay. Thank you. I'd like to say that the articles were published 2 weeks ago in English. They're available. There is a QR code that is being shown on the screen so you can access them. And all of the articles have been translated to Portuguese, Spanish, and they'll pretty soon be available in the Lancet website. Just a few details have to be tweaked, but in a few days they're going to be available in Portuguese and Spanish. at the Lancet website. Now we ask Adriano Massuda, the Executive Secretary of the Ministry of Health from Brazil. Good morning. I'd like to greet Professor Carlos Monteiro, Professor Patricia Jani, our host here, and Philip Baker as well, and also greet the authorities present. I'd like to greet Elisabetta, the President of CONSEA, Patricia Gentil, the Director of Healthy Food and the MDS, and also to Joaquim Gonzalez from UNICEF, Paulo Jones from CT Promotion Saúde, and Elisa Pietro from the PAHO, from PAHO. First, I'd like to say that it's an honor to be here representing the Minister Alexandre Padilha, that would like to be here, and he asked me to represent him here in this event. He's together with Minister Haddad in a press round about actions of the Brazilian government to deal with the new problem, a public health problem that also affects us in different scales, but also impacts health, mental health, economy, which is the bets or the betting companies. The group of measures that the Brazilian government has taken, the regulatory measures of the organization of the healthcare system to deal with mental health actions. That is, there are new important challenges that are coming up that have to do with health and healthcare. And we should probably highlight the importance of a publication, a series such as this one here on Lancet, to present the problem with the complexity, the size, and appropriate. In a series like this that has 3 papers that go into that detail this problem from the scientific perspective, showing evidence that how we should change the patterns and how the change in diet has effects in the lives of people, and also the change in nutritional pattern and the effects that we also need to organize our public health from the perspective of the treatments provided. But remembering that this is not a problem just of health, it needs a state policy, economic policy, and regulatory policies. Health, it's a problem where the area where the problem becomes more evident, the consequences. And Lancet is also very brave. Philip here is presenting how the organizations operate. It's not just in food and nutrition that this type of operation happens to try and deconstruct the regulatory measures, but also the institutions. Here in Brazil, we experienced this process recently. We're under the leadership of President Lula in the Ministry of Health, first with Anisa Trindade and now with Minister Alexandre Padilha. We are facing a challenge of rebuilding the Ministry of Health and also rebuild public policies that have been destroyed, and considering technical teams and budget and the effect that it causes in the health system of Brazil. So these are modern or contemporary challenges, collective health and health systems, they're all facing that have a very high complexity. We are also finalizing the Abrasco conference. Probably some of you were there. And one of the things that I mentioned in the opening of the conference of Abrasco is this presentation cannot be located just in the academic environment. That has to be presented in the management of SUS, the National Health System. This has to be included in the agenda of the municipal and the state health secretaries. We probably should organize a presentation in the tripartite, the last one. We presented the work that I had the opportunity to be one of the co-authors in primary healthcare, the resilience of the health system and the importance of primary healthcare to face different challenges in emergence and public healthcare, and now the agenda, health, climate, that goes into the debate of after COP30. For the first time, COP30 had an area dedicated to health, thinking about how we should rethink our healthcare systems to face these public emergencies and how or respond to these public emergencies, and also the recovery activities. There was a task force that in SUS that was created at first, and after this healthcare scare that we had with the pandemic, we need to deal with mental health as well. So we were updating our programs to deal with the complexity of these public problems, public health problems. That's why in the Abraspe conference, we have to consider collective health more and more in the agenda of the managers of the SUS, and the challenges in the SUS also have to be present in the Abraspe, or else this was going to be turned into an article, and articles do not really deal with the management, the daily management of the systems. It's really important to highlight this aspect and to say that Brazil, as Philip mentioned, is recognized by major advances, and it's also important to look at these advances and to celebrate them because they're a source of inspiration. And as many examples that were shown here in the perspective of public policies against hunger, Bolsa Familia, a national policy on food education or food in schools. And also when I was the secretary in Curitiba, when we got the two aspects, when we got them close, the health and education, that was really important in the change of the nutritional pattern in schools. And the students started to debate with their peers and parents their nutritional patterns and diets, such as André, that is also here with his kid. And we have to say that we have to think about this new generation and the mobilization, which is not an individual one, it's a global one. And how important it is to think about this and the public policies that worked out. The one that against smoking, for example, we faced head on these smoking companies or tobacco companies that thought, considering the prevention, control, and all the way to care and treatment, to have a full circle treatment. Maybe that's the biggest and the most important aspect of SUS, that combines the universal aspect and integral treatment. And this combination between collective health in Brazil and remembering Abrasco and also our SUS and the search to try and change Brazil and to have more civilizatory standards for such an unequal country, that's what we have to consider strongly, not just isolated actions or fragmented, but articulated actions at the correct dimension and size to face such complex problems. I said I changed my agenda so I could hear the articles, hear the paper, and so to highlight the importance that the government Lula has, and that Minister Padilha also considers in the health ministry, to work in a collaborative manner, we need a global action that is articulated, coordinated, involving people who want to do good, facing such petty interests that rule these environments, these areas. Actions that are strong enough that will influence lobby, Congress, the National Congress, and actually these influences that prevent from us to advance. So I'd like to congratulate and thank you once again for the opportunity to have the leadership, the global leadership of Carlos Monteiro, Patricia Jaime. It's not small matter what Brazil managed to do. I'm not sure if Professor Deborah Malta is still here. She's one of the researchers that is the most often mentioned in the world, considering collective health in Brazil. Cesar Vitor also, that dealt with breastfeeding and how you're helping the world encourage and foster this debate, how important it is. And we need to celebrate you all and to make this work more and more useful so we can apply it in public policies. Thank you so much and congratulations for the event.
Muito obrigada.
Thank you, Deputy Secretary. I invite the participants of the table to come to the audience.
Dando sequência ao evento.
Now, continuing with the event, we ask Patricia Gentil, the director of the Department of Proper Food and Healthy Food, CISAN, the Ministry of Development of Health and Fight Against Hunger.
Obrigada. Bom, não é muito justo eu ficar aqui só, né?
Yes, I probably. So, good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here. I'm representing our secretary, Lilian Howe, that is in a meeting with Minister Wellington in Bahia State with some launching a few programs from the National Secretary of Food Security and Nutritional Security. I say hi to everyone here on her behalf. She knows really well the guide, the food guide, and she's also a mentor in our secretary in organizing the group of our agendas and has as a guiding principle and guideline the incorporation of the food guide into Brazilian nutrition. I'd like to greet Fiocruz and would like to greet here and thank for their welcome and all the organizations that are contributing for this event. And I have here my list to keep within the allotted time. I'd like to thank you also for the invitation of Nupens, the partnership that we developed in a very strategic manner, to thank especially the researchers of the Lancet Series on behalf of Professor Carlos, Patricia Jaime. I greet all of the Brazilian team that put the country at the center of the food production and public health also. And I also recognize all of the social organizations that do an advocacy for the agenda of food security and health security also, and considering a group of regulatory policies. And we can see the advance that happened in Brazil, considering the labeling of foods. And also to keep you, thank you for the invitation today.
I want to greet Rita, who's here, that takes over leadership and vocalizes this agenda in the groups, an important leadership for us, and tell you that for us, This is a moment that is important because the Lancet series is not only a set of evidences, it's a global alert, a global warning, and a summoning for a coordinated action nationally and internationally to tackle that standard of consumption that has a set of counterings, a count of confrontations for food systems, and it's a moment for us where Brazil goes back on track, so to say, after some years of setbacks. The country left the hunger map. It's not by chance, political decision, commitment of our President Lula's administration for healthy food and other policies for access to income, to employment, to supply, strengthening of family agriculture, and the national school food feeding program. We have CISAM, the National Nutrition and Food System, with a strong CAISAM interministerial chamber that is strong, a council that's operating a national food council, Hunger-Less Brazil plan with a set of agendas from the federal government that looks to countering hunger, to food safety and promotion of healthy food. I take the opportunity to once again recognize that the president of CONSEC is here, Elizabeth Argentina. I think CONSEA is, I can say, is the main council for public policies today that does advocacy and puts good pressure onto the government for the agenda of healthy food. But we know we need to go beyond. I think the series also points towards that. We have to overcome hunger, and that can't mean increase ultra-processed food consumption. Science is clear, ultra-processed replace real food and uh, worsens diets and increases risk of chronic diseases, and those products don't reach the table of people by individual choice, but because we have market logic defining the markets and the food choices. And also in Brazil, this environment is crossed by historic inequalities that was mentioned here. Families led by black women are the most affected by food unsafety and nutrition unsafety and most exposed to ultra-processed food. And when the income is low, time is short, and territory is a food desert, there is no free choice. So that's why discussing food is discussing race, gender, and territory. So I'd like to talk to some pathways this series brings and what we've been developing, especially by the Ministry of Social Development, led, which has been leading some agendas with other sectors, other partners who are here, and that I won't mention individually. But I think the first element that is important to reinforce here, think institutionalization of classification 9 of the food guide for Brazilian population. This is institutionalized through a presidential decree. So we have a national basic food basket integrated by nature and minimally natural and minimally processed food produced in a more sustainable manner without ultra processed food. And this decree aligns the set of public policies from production to consumption turn towards healthy, proper food and the consumption of least ultra-processed food as we can. So the first guideline is very structuring for our society. Since 2026, from 2026 on, the basic food basket will have zero taxation, while the ultra processed food go back to the 27% taxation. It's cheap food at people's table. Second, agriculture credit policy and all the set of policies already led by SAFRA plan, by the Ministry of Agriculture Development, by Family Agriculture, that producing basic basket food is cheaper, credit is cheaper, and there's a set of incentives and the SAFRA plan for the production of that kind of food and for the transition towards more sustainable models. And third, we just launched within the Contrata Mais, which is a platform for public procurement from the federal government. Is a support within that platform. We cataloged from the 3,000 products the government purchases. We cataloged, we have 48% of ultra processed food. We have 2.6 billion reais that the government procures in food when we have to move on to assure 3.5 million uh, in food purchase and healthy food, and we must move towards 30% of natural food, healthy food procurement, and all these have alerts. They are based on the new classification and have warnings for purchase or non-purchase, and the next step is to exclude all. We're trying, that's the next step, to exclude all ultra-processed products, if not all, but many, from the possibility of being purchased or procured by the federal government. So it's the state providing kickoff and the state beginning to perform its leadership with a concrete example of healthy food purchase. Another example I'd like to highlight is cities with the acts of transformation and a set of public policies in the most vulnerabilized territories. 87% of our populations live in the cities, and one of the major challenges of urbanization and discussing hunger in the cities is different from discussing hunger in territories, especially with price, logistics, food supply. So because of that, we launched the Alimenta Cidades strategies with the MDA, CONABI, Ministry of Cities. We are already in the largest 100 cities and moving on to many more municipalities. We mapped food deserts in 91 cities with 97 million people living, and from these, 25 million live in food deserts and 40 million live where ultra-processed food dominates the territory. So in that sense, the strategy has a perspective of converging public policies turned towards improving access and production of food in the outskirts, in the invisibilized neighborhoods and the precarized territories. We are reorganizing food systems in the cities. We're talking about urban agriculture, food safety, nutrition safety equipment, popular supply, in the logic of short circuits of production and consumption. I'd like to highlight two programs, PAA, historic program since 2023, that buys 324,000 tons of food, quoting the main one, yuca, corn, sweet potatoes, destined to 16,000 units, benefiting thousands of family agriculture producers. The Solidarity Kitchen program, recognizing the popular initiatives, are part of the solution. Over 1,200 Solidarity Kitchens that assure 300,000 meals per day for people in the more vulnerabilized territories. And I'd like to highlight a very sensitive
que a gente está começando para o Recife com Fala Aí, galera, e chegaremos a todas as capitais com Comer para Quem é na Periferia. Estamos mobilizando jovens para entender que comida é política, o Guia Alimentar é uma ferramenta de cidadania.
The food guide is a tool of citizenship. And another point is for you, young people and children, and which is for the guidelines for canteens of ultra processed and the marketing within schools. We're supporting 52 cities and a few states with specific regulations. 2 bills passed, 17 that are being voted, and 1 year with the potential to protect 20 million students in school. And I have to mention also the National Food Program of in schools. That is the first program in that was put the against the Brazilian games, and the talks about selling the area and the marketing that is developed in the schools.
É o enfrentamento da obesidade quanto uma questão social.
Another point is obesity as a task for all of us. We have another strategy for prevention against also,
A obesidade, então,
and it recognizes an obesity also as a social matter as well, not individual.
e reconhece explicitamente
And recognizes specifically the ultra-processed foods, subsogenic environments, and determinants that are at the core of the problem. About the last point to talk to the series, I'd like to mention the perspective of integration of food and climate. The series is clear. Ultra-processed depend on plastic, fossil fuels, concentrating profits, spreading pollution and disease. We launched at COP a milestone of reference of food systems and climate. The milestone recognizes the interrelationship between food systems and climates, proposing pathways to guide public policies to transform food systems into more sustainable and healthy ones. We have pathways to strengthen democratic governance and integrate it to a condition to ensure coherence and avoid contradictions between policies that must walk together and the pathways that define that transition towards healthy, sustainable, resilient food systems include agriculture transition. There's a premise pathway that is challenging, that needs investment, but the recognition of a need to drive agroecological transition in the country and strengthen social biodiversity, stimulate circular and bioresilient cities, promoting environments for proper, healthy food systems for people and the ecosystem. It's important to say at COP, we presented a plan to speed up these policies and climate. It's a response from the ministry to for proper access to proper food and all the action agenda, and it's a global initiative for the engagement of partners and countries so policies are converging and coherent in transformation of food systems. As a strong driver for this agenda, we're discussing the access to healthy food without UPF is part of the global discussion. So to close, I'm moving towards closure because of time. I'm over my time, right, Anna? Okay, so we are here. We are clear as to standing for healthy food is against power symmetries, and our global response must be collective. That's why in the presidency of the G20 and the Global Alliance to Tackle Hunger and Poverty, Brazil somehow summons the world towards a collective agenda, and for that purpose, the message is clear: real food at the table and at the center of the policies, because where healthy food lacks, diseases and unhealth, lack of health spreads. So thank you. Good morning. I'd just like to make an ad. We launched that book in COP, The Future at the Table, Policy for Foods and Nutrition Safety Facing Climate Change. It's a set of policies. It's a little bit of what I mentioned here. Their policies developed in the Food and Nutrition Safety Secretariat, that dialogue about healthy food, about tackling the ultra processed food, and talks about the relationship with climate and the need to for the transition towards healthy and sustainable food systems. It's in the ministry's website if you want to access it. Thank you. Thank you very much, Patricia. So carrying on, we invite Ms. Beatriz Quispiquili, who is Director of Promotion of Health from the Ministry of Health from Peru, who will participate virtually, please. Hello, good morning. Beatriz, you have the floor. Thank you very much. Well, just a clarification. I am Beatriz Quispiquia, Specialist in Promotion of Health, and I talk on behalf of Dr. Max, our Director for Promotion of Health. I'll talk on behalf of him. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Ministry of Health of the Government of Peru, I want to thank you for the invitation. The Brazilian Plan for Excellency in Tackling Hunger. Thank you for inviting us for this important launch of the Lancet Series on ultra-processed food and human health. Just a second, I want to be sure if I'm being able to share my screen. There's an interference with the translation. Well, I followed the presentations, and it's an honor to share with Dr. Carlos Monteiro and the team of authors. For us, they're very important in the process of public policies development, and I'd like to highlight this Lancet Series is a decisive moment for our country because it shows very important scientific evidence and will allow us to protect these changes we are seeking for years in the regulation of the law that promotes healthy food. And with regards to what we received from the public administration, that shows us that we clearly must change the law's regulation. Every time we don't see ultra-processed food, so in other words, the children's diets, and on the other hand, they demand us the alignment of the technical parameters based on the recommendations of the WHO and PAHO. Actually, our parameters are very important. They're very flexible, and they're not so demanding as in Argentina or Mexico, but we believe this Lancet series will contribute pretty much to justify this change in our regulation. On the other hand, we see very clearly that ultra-processed food are for us an urgency, a moment of urgency, and very important for everyone's health. And it's only one way of restraining the law that doesn't only mention ultra-processed food, but it doesn't approach the ultra-processed food topic for the industry. And translation apologizes, but the audio is not arriving well in the booth. When we refer to this kind of food, and on the other hand, we've had 6 aspects, and among them, the front labeling. So this is coherent to the global guidelines about the public policies development, and this will allow us to have guidance for the new regulations. So to incorporate the ultra-processed food, to incorporate this new category in the regulatory policies of the country, because, well, it's important to consider that for this kind of product. That's the first aspect we must consider. The second aspect is regarding the food categories, and our law approaches that subject, and this helps us to see how we can strengthen the choices of food for the schools, hospitals, universities, all institutions, to that help guarantee the population's health through food. The third domain is connected to the corporations that produce this kind of food. So the business models and the food chains have grown very much in Peru. So we can quote some trading centers where these fast food chains are installed, and we know the offer of food to the consumer is based on ultra processed food. So it's important to uh, carry on with that domain. And finally, it's very important to consider and strengthen the reflections.
Y ahí creo que hay un modelo interesante que podemos recoger las experiencias del gobierno de Chile.
With the
Desde el Poder Legislativo hay una propuesta
a legislative proposal that tries to forbid the ultra processed foods and the non-alcoholic beverages. And the law that's established, the what's established by the law, and that's really important. And the series proposes a governance framework to face also the opposition and now to deal with the remuneratory processes. It's going to affect definitely the trade, the interests, and it's going to also. And this Lancet series deals with clarity with the main obstacle, and it shows the ultra processed, the corporate interests of the ultra processed industry. It has to be considered, and that's why I have to consider to foster to protect the health of the population and the food governance, and considering the interference of the conflict, the trade in conflicts. I believe it's important to protect food governance. On the other hand, to strengthen, especially considering the conflicts of interests and the spaces where the industry is present, and where we're going to look at these obstacles and these regulatory policies, or especially the structuring of regulatory frameworks for each one of the parties, especially the Ministry of Health, considering the circular food topic, and also consider build international coalitions. It's important to partner with civil society, with the cooperative collaboration of the agencies, to strengthen this regulatory change and to guarantee this political space. And these instructions are going to be fundamental to defend the process of changing the law within the public interest, besides the commercial interests that are present in the industry. And this Lancet series finally offers to provide a strategic guideline to expand the advance of the regulation and to approach the systematic causes that foster the consumption of the ultra-processed foods, and strengthen public governance considering the corporate interference from the Ministry of Health. We have this challenge. We know that strengthening our food policies is essential to protect the health of the population, especially of children and young people. Thank you so much for it. Thank you so much, Beatriz. Now we ask to come to the stage the participants of the debate for public policies in Latin America. For the opening of the debate mediation, we ask Rita Lobo. Rita Lobo. Is a chef and presenter of the program Panelinha. She is a partner of the New Pens and the World Food Program, WFP. She works in building strategies of communication that value true food and culinary as a public health tool. We ask Dr. Elisa Prieto Lara, representing the Pan American Health Organization, the World Health Organization, PAHO, WHO in Brazil. And we ask the floor Miss Eliane Souza, coordinator of projects in the Center of Excellence of Nutrition and Fight Against Hunger. We also ask to the stage George Mesa, the representative of the Office of the United Nations Office on Food and Agriculture, FAO. And we ask to the stage Joaquin Gonzalez Aleman, representative of the Office of the United Nations for the Childhood, UNICEF in Brazil. And finally, we ask Paula Jones, Director of ACT for Promotion of Health. Now I pass the floor to Rita Lobo, who is going to lead the debate. Thank you, everyone who's here, who are also watching online. And the 25 years of Panelinha impacting more than 10 million people and the websites, I watched a lot of trends, nutritional trends, at the very beginning in the early 2000s. Actually, in the year 2000, people wanted light recipes with fewer calories. And after that, they wanted diet calories without sugar, then the gluten-free, and everything without any specific nutrition necessity. And because I always ask this, why would you like this? Because it's healthy. People say because it's healthier. And after that, there is the low carb and everything has to be hyperproteic. During all of this time, this 25 years, Panelinha and we really wanted to improve the food for people, their diets, and trying to teach regular cooking and without going towards the little trends, the food trends, and without accepting any type of publicity of what we call nowadays the ultra-processed industry. That was the point that I wanted to reach. Considering you're Brazilian, we have an idea what true food is, considering our traditional pattern that is balanced. The symbol of the Brazilian food diet, which is the PF, or the ready-made dish, and which has rice and beans and all the traditional foods. We understand that nutritional trends are not healthy, and it was always based on intuition. Until there was a classification of the food according to processing, and that changed everything. The new classification is the piece of the puzzle that was missing for us to be clear of what true food is. And it is the extreme opposite pole of the ultra processed. It's made with food that is very little processed, with human hands. It uses traditional cooking methods. It respects the traditional pattern that is balanced, but it also incorporates new flavors and foods. It is alive because it is our culture. It related to our culture, and hopefully will be in our future as well. Healthy food is a synonym of true nutrition, and the ultra processed, that's what they removed from us, and they're also molding the way we speak. Now meat is protein, and when you look for protein, doesn't matter whether it's chicken, bean, or whey, or proteic yogurt that is ultra processed. From the perspective of the kitchen, the increase of the ultra processed products is also a type of gender. To remove the ultra processed. From the nutrition, we have to cook more. And to cook more, people will say the women do not have the time, but who says it's women that have to cook, right? I've been working for decades talking about this. Nutrition or diet is not a matter just for women, it's a matter for a topic for men and women and young people. And the reason I was in the launch of the Lancet series in England on human health, the classification, according to the degree of processing, it shows that cooking it's a way to remove the ultra processed from our tables and from our kitchens. And over 30 years teaching people how to cook, I can state that cooking is not a gift. It is a learning process. I wasn't born with the skills. I learned it. So I can make sure that everybody can learn. It's like reading and writing. Everybody should be able to do this. And in our debate, I hope that somehow we can get to the kitchen. But before that, I'll ask a question and then I'll tell you the rules. That will be two blocks, and each one has 2 minutes to answer it. Is anyone keeping track of time? Can you keep track of time for me? And whoever wants to go first, goes first. The first question is, in what way the evidence that was presented by the Lancet series on ultra-processed foods can guide, but in a practical manner, the Latin American public policies in the coming years? Go ahead. I'll start then. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure. In this space full of people, I'd like to greet Rita because of the facilitation and our colleagues from our agenda, from other agencies. And it's a fundamental actor. Yes, the microphone a bit closer. Yeah, so you can hear. Yeah, no, I just wanted to greet. It's not the 2 minutes, right? Obrigado. They are giants, right? These people. So we feel really little compared to next to you. Thank you so much for the class. It was very useful and very powerful as well. And I'd like to congratulate the Brazilian government. I believe that we have a lot of people here. I don't like mentioning names, but I have to mention Kelly, Leticia, Gisele, Janine. You talked about gender, but here we have very powerful women. These are just a few of them that are mobilizing the agenda. A round of applause. So it's a great thing that to know all of these women that make a difference. We'll say the following: all of the other ones, consider that they thanked everyone here. You learned a lot with Professor Carlos Monteiro, with Patricia Jaime especially. Phil, basically, it was a great. Then we'll be able to answer. Yes, it's a good thing there was I went first. Yeah, it represented everyone, right? So I'd like to give you an example of how the evidence and the new classification, the classification NOVA, has influenced the PAHO work. PAHO, some of the policies have been mentioned, and Patricia has mentioned that as well, but I'm not going to repeat it. But the profile of nutrients in PAHO is classified in the NOVA classification. And this profile has been fundamental to help these policies. And Patricia showed a slide that in a very visual way, it shows how you can make this classification and how the profile of nutrients, especially the frontal labeling, can capture a much higher percentage of ultra-processed foods. And this has an impact in the consumption. And it's not always practical how this evidence can be interpreted into practical decisions. And I believe these are the 2 minutes, right? You want to answer? Okay. Okay, I'm not going to say hi to everyone here. Rita, thank you so much. Especially Lancet magazine. It's not that we're starting a process in the region because it was very strong process. We're actually just fostering, helping the process. And second aspect, at least from the perspective of FAO, one of the mandates that we have right now is to change the agri-food systems, because these agri-food systems, they go from the production all the way to the consumption. All of the system has to be transformed, and it's a non-perfect system. Even though we have enough food for everyone in the world, a lot of people are going hungry. Even though we have biodiversity that is huge to produce food, we use more than 60% of the calories in very few foods, and so we concentrate and we put at risk our food and our diets. But it's also a system that by killing us, by food, feeding us, is killing the planet due to the greenhouse emissions. And the third aspect, when we're considering the original part, it's diet. When it's not regulated properly, it kills ourselves actually, and that's a process with the ultra processed products when they do not have provide healthy food or healthy diet. I'm not saying that technology is killing us. I'm saying that technology is important to reach this food security, but we have to remember that this technology should make available healthy foods, whether it's very healthy, not processed. Yes, the point that you mentioned is really important. And I think that sustainability is probably one of the main aspects that we have to debate, considering the NOVA classification. That is the tripod or the trifactor area, including all of these three factors, is very important to be considered. I wanted to name two examples from the World Food Program. We are big buyers of food. It's an agency that considers these emergencies and it hands or distributes food. The work from WFP extended especially to the global south. We are an institution that has the policy of local purchase, and as big buyers of food, we favor a supply chain that is shorter, of local purchase, of family agriculture products, and this has made a whole difference here in this region. In four pilot countries such as Nicaragua, Ecuador, Honduras, and another one here, we had very successful results. As big buyers, we're including the local production in the program. Another example that I want to give, there is a recent publication in October that in our countries, for the first time, there was a recommendation of not buying the ultra-processed foods. It makes a lot of difference when an agency of the UN incorporates this terminology and the guiding ones. For the first time, there were recommendations that were given about not buying products that could be or could create problems for breastfeeding or sugary drinks. So for us, it's a reason to be proud. Of course, it's the Brazilian government that is a very big government, but we do understand that it sets major advancements. This is a document that goes to more than 100 countries that provides these guidelines and this information. Thank you so much. I'm not going to congratulate you for the series, but I'm here as a civil society, and I have to thank because it's an honor and a great responsibility to be here. There are a lot of people within this room, outside, within the government, outside the government, within the academia and outside that have been working for such a long time, even before I started. So it's something connecting to the publication of the series.
I'm a little intimidated, but in the good sense, in the sense of responsibility. I think the series positions ultra processed food in a place similar to tobacco as a public health issue in society that needs global response, needs regulation, that can't be self-regulated by the industries, and we must observe commercial determinants of health. So in that place, I'm comfortable. I'm thinking I see so many references of mine in the field of food here that this is a really a major honor, and I'd like to place that series in the environment of connected to another Lancet series that is part of that pathway, that course, one of the first series that associates food systems to the environmental problem. So the series about commercial determinants of health. And so this series closes with a golden key. The series, I don't know if it's going to close all the to finish the subject, but it brings a large potency as civil society that does direct incidents. So we move forward with public policies to regulate UPF, and it brings robustness to a debate we've been doing already that maybe we didn't have before. The fact it took 3 years to be approved says a lot about relationships between the North and South, global North and South. But 3 years is a sign we have obstacles that make us better respond to the challenges that we're having. And finally, a major success indicator, one of the major ones, maybe the largest, is when the industry panics. And I think that's the case because after the series was launched and full navigated the same day or the next day, we had a response from the industry saying we can't pretend ultra processed food doesn't exist anymore because the industry uses this negation. The industry uses denial to say it doesn't exist, but when they say we can't use that anymore, and they must dispute the concept and quote the benefits of ultra processed food, that's a warning for all of us, an alert. Paula, you know I could listen to you talking for hours and hours, as you well know. And as you mentioned, the parallel with the ultra processed food and tobacco, and there's a parallel of the compensation system and how both are extremely addictive. And inclusively, Professor Ashley Gerhardt, she was an author also of one of the first article and had its launch in London talking exactly about this. Good morning, everyone. I will greet democratically all ladies and gentlemen without mentioning their positions because within this room there's a commitment and intellectual ability and communicational ability so important, and that we must also cherish this day. So for us, the importance of this launch, because we've worked with the researcher to see the aspects of how ultra processed food affect children's health. So how publicity is so powerful, reaching the children and youngsters, and how schools are places of protection. So we're working with the school programs to pass a law in the state of Ceará to protect the schools from school food, from the ultra-processed food. And we had a Congress on that, so it's important to protect children. They are very vulnerable uh, regarding that kind of food. And something I took from the Secretary's speech is that there are contemporaneous challenges. We were talking about the bets, the social media and the ultra processed food, how they use algorithms, how is that food that makes them have a compulsion to eat that food, to look, check social media. So it's we need information to that. That's why I value the work of the researcher, the work of you all, the academia, civil society, the government. Also, we have to help the government to strengthen their ability to have policies to protect people, protect children, and this will cost more and more in time. Like tobacco, if we approach that problem now, we are going to avoid the healthcare units to have an overload further on. So tackling, facing the industry and supporting the government are two very important things to protect children. And let's see what's going to happen today at the Congress, and it's very important to you. So thank you all for your time. Thank you for the contribution. I thank the researchers. Very well. Thank you, reminding that the more recent report from UNICEF highlights that obesity is a more serious problem than malnutrition in the world, and this approaches the importance of the work facing the ultra-processed food. Do we have another question? Well, I won't ask a question. I'll do a provocation. I just want to tell you something before. I work with new paints for a little over 10 years. Because of that work, I began talking in many medic congresses, cardiology, pediatric, and among other medic events, scientific events. And something pretty interesting is that every time people talk about cooking, they say, because the cooking abilities, because the importance of preparation, because the classification of food, but people aren't able to say cook. It looks like it's a minor, least important thing. So the fact of me being here in other places talks a lot about the relevance of valuing cooking, valuing the kitchen, not like a housewife place, but a place of everyone's home. And the question I'll ask has to do with that and the provocation, because I think nobody has this. This is a ready answer for that. The series reinforces that cooking and eating real food are essential for health, right? So, in practice, what can the governments do to make the kitchen a possible place in people's daily lives and not a privilege?
I want to see who starts.
I'll try to answer to this good provocation, and not under all aspects that we could comment regarding the topic, which is very broad. So having the privilege of cooking and eating real food at home, or at least having spaces to eat real food, imply to substantial change in our development models. But one of the important aspects that we have to talk about in the whole of society is the process of education since tender age, so we stop being nutritional illiterates. Most of us, maybe not here, but most of societies, including myself, are or were nutritional illiterates. That is to say, we didn't know how we should choose our food for our specific needs and for our families. We don't know how to read when we take a tag of a processed or ultra processed food. We don't know what's there. It's hard to understand what is there. So, since children, we must stop being nutritional illiterates, and that will improve very much when we are adults. First, in looking proper food for our family. Second, looking for ourselves, looking for proper food for ourselves, and have work habits, hours habits that can allow us to have a healthy nutrition. If we're not convinced of that, and if we can't use that knowledge for better nutrition, it'll be hard that even changing hours, distances, price of food, we we eat proper food. It's very complex because time, hours, prices. Now there is an interesting side in what you said, which is very paradoxical, because at the same time, let's say our grandparents didn't have that nutritional culture of knowing about the nutrition. Food was very good. And I think what the classification tells us is that the problem are not the people but the food systems. It became hard to choose because there are too many ultra processed foods. I'll tell you a story in less than 10 seconds, and that is the following. I have a friend that told me one day, why do you mention this ultra processed things so much? I don't know anyone who eats ultra processed food. And I said, Judah, and I was in her house on the weekend, and then cut back on breakfast, and can imagine uh, bread, white bread, chocolate, drinks. And I said, take a look at the list of ingredients just from this bread to begin with. I said, I can't believe it. I'm eating ultra processed food. So people don't even know how much ultra processed food they're eating. So it's a very strong paradox. You're touching a very important point, which is communication. So we must communicate effectively, something the secretary mentioned. We must broadcast, publicize with the managers, with the population, and how to translate that evidence into something we can understand. But I'd like to bring an element. I think we have a lot to value, not only the act of cooking, but the act of eating together. It's a space of connection. I think food has this affection space that we end up losing when we talk about standards. It's not only the standard of what we eat, but how we eat, where we eat, with who we eat, how much time we dedicate to that. I'm a mother. I have small children, and it's a space of meeting with my children, my husband. It's a family meeting time. So it's a concept we must bring with us, that food connects, and mental health has to do with that. So to value that connection space is very important. And your question said, what can the governments do, is a very complex question. I think there are many public policy solutions, the issue of accessibility, the issue of being economically accessible, physically accessible. And there are other public policies that were mentioned today, Bolsa Familia, an aid program, and then there's a ministry policy to contribute the spaces to recover moments, allowing not only to cook, but to recover the connection, because we're not nourishing only the body, we're nourishing the soul. Food nourishes much more than the body, it goes beyond the nutrients. It feeds relationships, feeds our culture, and so forth. I just want to make a comment regarding the issue of the food culture, respect for culture. We have of access to food, and the cultural issue also related. We have a project called Beyond Cotton, where we work on 3 African countries, and the issue of how it's important to have access to food, and how the families began having access and began cooking, but oftentimes not, without knowing, I have access to that food, but well, how do I do? What practice can I use? How can I use this food the best way? Because oftentimes it's there, they produce that, but they are not using it in the way. They don't have that. Not even the cooking practice. It's even will sometimes something's lacking to talk about the climate issue. What is the energy source we'll use for that food to prepare that food? For example, it's oftentimes in African schools they use women are there cooking, but cooking uh, with fire from wood. So these issues must be taken into consideration when we think on public policies. Elisa mentioned here, we must remember the Brazilian experience with solidary kitchens and all, and other issues. For example, the school feeding program with its nutrition and feeding education programs. Taking these children to these spaces is also important. So to take piggyback on the gender issue, that is absolutely core, goes by the replacement, going towards a series of ultra-processed food placed in the world as something practical, especially for women. And I'll mention the devaluation of cooking and planting, the devaluation of the ones planting real food. The main indicator is that if you look towards the difficulty of survival of a farmer, of a agriculture versus a millionaire's $1 million salary of a CEO of a corporation that is killing us. It's not the food system that is sick. Today is a symbolic day for this series because 4051 a bill of law will be voted today to 2:30 in the afternoon. I'm seeing thumbs up. Yes, and I think it's very symbolic. It would be the first time that a bill of law, it's not a final vote, but it's important to go by a commission and to have an approval by a Senate commission will be beautiful, approval of such a bill. And another one, the selective taxation for sodas in Ceará. So if you go meet Paulo Benevides, and because selective tax is far from being one, selective tax for sodas, Mauro Benevides is the rapporteur for a bill of law. And there was a limitation of 2% for that tax, meaning in practice, soda will pay less tax than this pen because of the benefits in the Manaus taxation benefit law. We wanted a minimum 8% tax, but they're placing 2%. I think it's a scandal to go by that situation in Brazil, and it's in the hands of Mauro Benevides. Call his pets veterinarian or whatever. He's the rapporteur of this. It's in his hands. For me, cooking, I think, comes into contact with your human ambition.
It's like lighting a fire. It's an activity that's seasoning the foods, and it's the best way, and it's the best time for us during the day, and we can change this. In Brazil, we have to congratulate Brazil for this, for everything that you've been doing. The healthy schools, right? Law. How you're promoting nutritional and food education in schools, the promotion also of the fairer food systems, especially for vulnerable populations. Yesterday at UNICEF, we had a tool workshop on this, on the indigenous food systems, and how the grandparents help in, especially in the basic group of foods, and also in the food staples, especially in the countries of the region. I'm very happy to be here, as I mentioned before, with such intellectual communication powerhouses. Thank you so much for this invitation. Thank you, everyone. Ana, it's with you. We're going to finalize the event and wait here. Considering the time, we're just going to open the floor for two interventions of the government that are really committed to this agenda and that will be able to say a few words before we finalize here this launch. First, Kelly Alves, the General Coordinator of Food and Nutrition of the Ministry of Health. You want to come here? You want to speak? Thank you, everyone here who is in person and here online as well, all of the partners who had helped us hold this event. And I would like to remind you that our support for this event is part of the commitment of the Ministry of Health in Brazil of production of knowledge and the dissemination of knowledge to subsidize or to help our public policies in health and also in food, nutrition, environment. The surveys of the population and our systems of information and the Ministry of Health in the 35 years of SUS has supported many Brazilian researchers so that our country would be an international reference in the area of scientific research in food and nutrition and other areas of the health. So we do celebrate the names of the Brazilian researchers that are in the list of so much impact, especially in the Lancet Series, as a result of the investments of our SUS, our Health Unified System, in funding public research that has no conflict of interests. And in the area of facing the serious epidemic of obesity, of consumption of ultra-processed foods by the Brazilian population, I'd like to highlight the choice of the Ministry of Health of the food guide and in the revision to base the recommendation based on food patterns and not specific food products. So it's very important for us to translate or interpret these guidelines of the food guide of using the words of prefer and not avoid, and not overvaluing specific nutrients, which is the narrative of the food industry, especially to foster the consumption of processed foods. And I'd like to highlight what Paula Jones mentioned about two regulatory measures that we need, especially the public support, and the Ministry of Health has supporting, which is the Bill 4501 from the Congressman Jacques Wagner, to especially in the schools. The PNI is a major advancement for the basic education system, but we also have private schools that also need protection. In our fight for the selective tax to be put on the price and to get good results as other countries have in the reduction of sugary drinks. And we are continue working with the Ministry of Employment and Work and the Ministry of Finance and Planning as well. We keep working in building the narrative of the nutrition program for the workers, PACHI, that works with millions of workers and with hundreds of companies in Brazil, also to provide these recommendations for the Brazilian population. Even though 80% of the companies that are part of the PACHI, they adopt the mechanism of food stamps or for food workers, and we cannot forget these companies in this regulation as well. We need the commitment of these companies in order to promote environmental food systems for within the companies And our proposal that is being drafted and discussed between many different ministries, we want to not just talk about the regulation on the production and of the meals and the companies that still have the food vouchers, that provide the food vouchers, and also, but the companies that have this option, they should be committed to environmental, to healthy environments for food. And I thank you once again for the opportunity. And I hope that the Lancet Series will be an inspiration for debates in Brazil and also in the states and the municipalities. Thank you.
Muito obrigada, Kelly. E por fim,
Thank you, Kelly. And now Silvio Porto from the Direction of Agricultural Policies of CONAB. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone here. And dear Patricia, I'd like to thank you so much for the invitation and congratulate everyone here present. It is a very good debate, especially in such a deep debate in agri-food systems. Here, we who are in the government, it's not an easy process, but we are really resilient, right, Patricia? So, taking baby steps, we can say that we got here thanks to the decision of President Lula in 2003 to reestablish Conselho. It was within this space for a dialogue and public pressure that could be exerted. That's why we arrived here. All of the main achievements in the food and food in schools, and also, and especially in the semi-arid region and other programs as well, it was all due to this discussion that we had in the SEAD. The social participation process is fundamental. Without it, we won't be able to move forward, especially with our current National Congress. And now, to finalize here, I'd like just to talk about 3 points. When discussing food systems, we have to look at the land system of Brazil. The land reform and agrarian reform is still a crucial aspect. We have to resume the debate of the land reform, that we have a serious problem of land concentration. 1% of rural establishments in Brazil concentrate 50% of the production in the country. That is not possible, and we cannot have democracy if we continue with this land concentration. At the same time, just 10 companies, supermarket companies, are responsible for more than 40% of what is consumed in this country. The 100 biggest companies at supermarkets in Brazil represent 86% of what we consume in the country. If we do not change this, we need a mechanism to control these corporations. Carrefour just bought Walmart operation. The 650 billion reais that was the gross revenue last year, 120 came from Carrefour. The third biggest supermarket company is from Maranhão. So these are significant changes that are happening in Brazil. Sometimes you do not realize it, the models between retail and bulk selling together, and in the consumption of the ultra-processed products. So the connection between the debate and with health and agricultural aspects, that is essential, of the utmost importance. And that was a space of debate, especially that we needed to have to make the connection between city and the farming areas. Especially in the next point is to think of the expanding the participation of the traditional communities and the delimitation of the lands, the deed properties of the quilombolas and the land reform, and also the small farming. We need to change the sanitary legislation in the country. This is one of the biggest hurdles for food, healthy food, to go into the table of Brazilians. And to do this by having a national program, considering the national policy for food supply, Conselho was fundamental in this work. And Vanessa Schatz is recovering and from a problem, a health problem, and she had a major role talking to the many different ministries within the Conseil. That is essential for us to advance. And the sanitary issue is one of the main problems that we have nowadays, and considering the pesticides as well. Remember everything that Professor Monteiro said. We also, the xenobiotics are basically pesticides, and they are in our bodies, they are in the environment, and within COP30, when we were discussing seriously the paths for the alternative paths for climate change, the Ministry of Agriculture accepted 30 new types of pesticides or agricultural defensives in the country. PRONAI is the national program for the reduction of pesticides, and we have to make it possible here and considering the ultra process together with this issue. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And to finalize, we'd like to thank the organizing institutions and the researchers that were authors of the series, the teams involved, and the public here presence. It was financed by Bloomberg Dynasty, and all of the articles here are projected in this one here in this screen. May it contribute to the health public policies based on evidence in Brazil and Latin America. We wish you a great day.